Do you ever write a sentence in your computer and erase it and hate yourself? Oh my heavens, this is the cure for writer's block. It doesn't help everybody, but the ones that it helps, it's mind-blowing.
Welcome to the Scriptcake podcast. I am your host, Lavinder Gill, and this week I am so excited to speak to William Akers. He is the author of a book that had a tremendous impact on my career. I actually remember the first time I saw it in a bookstore. There's a section in his book where he talks about having a good title. Boy, does he have a catchy title for his. Your Screenplay Sucks. And 100 Ways to Make It Great. And I remember looking at that title thinking, you know, my screenplay does suck and I probably could use 100 ways, and I'm sure you could as well. So we'll get into that. Will has been teaching for over 30 years. So I think he has a pretty good idea of what he's talking about. He has over 3 produced screenplays. He's a lifetime member of the Writers Guild. And his book, again, entitled Your Screenplay Sucks, has been the #1 book on scriptreaderpro.com for 3 years running in terms of screenwriting books. Welcome to the podcast, Will.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
I remember seeing your book, like I said, in the bookshelf, and the title just hit me like a ton of bricks. And that's something you talk about in your book, about how important it is to have a good title. And we'll get into that a little bit. But I just love the fact that I guess you've curated all this stuff over many, many years of dealing with students and kind of got tired of seeing the same old thing again. And very quickly, just tell me how the book came about.
The book came about because a teacher at UNLV in Las Vegas invited me to come out there and speak. And I'm big on handouts when I teach. And I thought, well, I can't go to this thing. And I've been teaching at Vanderbilt then for a pretty good while. And so I thought, I can't go to this talk and not have a handout. Let me put something together to give them. And I put together a handout. It was 100 pages long. And I thought, oh, this might be a book. Wow. And then I kind of came up with the idea of what it was going to be. It was a checklist, because I have writing clients who pay me to critique their scripts, and then students who were paying me to critique their scripts. And so I knew the mistakes that people made. And so that was where the book came from. And then I got exceedingly lucky. I was at a teaching conference in Chicago and had just gotten Save the Cat the night before, and I read the whole book in a night, thought this is really good. And I came down for breakfast before I went to the train to get on the plane to fly home, and Blake Snyder was sitting there. So I said, hey, Blake, your book is absolutely amazing. Can I sit down and talk to you? And so we sat down, and we ended up being really great friends. He said, and I told him about my book eventually. He said, I can get that published. And so he was my entry into my publisher, which is great. So that's where it came from, was mistakes that students made.
Right. Well, I have a small connection to Blake myself back when I taught at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. I think that was right about the time that Blake's book came out.
Mm-hmm.
I reached out to him, and every semester he would call into my classes to talk about his book. And I remember no one ever laughing at their own jokes more than Blake Snyder.
He would call into my classes too, and he was phenomenally helpful and very giving. I mean, he really, really cared. And his book is great, and he was the nicest guy in the world. Right. And he was very supportive of me and my writing career, which was great. He was very encouraging without, saying silly things. I mean, you knew when he said this was good, it meant it was good, which is what you need to do when you're a teacher. You need to tell them when it doesn't work, and then they'll believe you when you tell them it does work.
Yeah, absolutely. And we lost him too soon, so he is missed. So let's digress here. One of the things that I always love to find out is each person's journey into the wild world of filmmaking. Can you tell me how it started for you? Because I believe you grew up in the South, like myself. How does a good old Southern boy end up in Hollywood?
I wanted, all my life growing up, I'd wanted to be a cartoonist. And I went to art school a little bit, and that's what I was aiming at, was being a cartoonist. And I wanted to be the kind that told the story. Not a gag a day guy, but someone who's telling a story over 6 weeks, like television, really. And those comic strips began to go away. And so by the time I was in college, they were new story strips were extinct. They didn't exist. And I was not a comic book guy. I was a comic strip newspaper guy. And so I thought, well, what am I going to do? And I was in college at that point, and I realized, oh, movies. It's the same thing, it's a frame, like a panel in a comic strip. I thought I can just maybe movies would work, and so that's how I got into movies. And I thought, well, writing is something I can practice alone, because my other idea was I might want to be a cinematographer. But I thought I don't have enough friends to help me practice being a cinematographer. I can practice writing by myself, and so that's what I stuck with.
Okay. And where were you when you just made this decision?
I was at Vanderbilt as a student.
Okay.
And then after Vanderbilt, I went to USC Film School, and then I stayed in LA, started writing. I was writing at USC, and literally the first script I wrote got made. I thought, well, this is really going to be easy. And turned out to be a lot harder than that every other time.
Yeah.
But I loved USC. I loved the people there. It was the first time in my life I'd ever been in a room full of people who were basically just like me. And that was a game changer. I had always been odd man out growing up, but now I was in a room full of people who all we did was talk about movies. And that was just wonderful.
When I was before I went to film school, I was the guy on trivia night. Whenever a movie came up, didn't matter what it was, everyone would look to me because they knew I knew the answer.
Right.
I knew so much more about it than anybody else. And then I remember literally my first day at film school, which I did go to the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. It's my alma mater. And hanging out with kids the first couple days, the first week, they knew so much more about the film industry than I did,
which is great.
It was
fantastic. Because you want to be around people that know more than you do. Absolutely. You want to have, you can learn from people who know more than you do. It's harder to learn from people who don't know anything, although you probably can at some point. But yeah, knowing more than we had really talented people around me in film school, and it was great. Yeah. And I learned a lot from them. I mean, you learn a lot from your teachers, but you also learn a lot from your fellow students.
No, I have a ton of classmates that are doing very well in the film industry now, and they were the same then that they are now. They were just driven and focused and just kind of knew what they were doing and knew what they wanted to go for, and they continue to do that. But can you tell me some of the major things that started this list for you? What were the things that you found you were repeating yourself with, student after student after student, that kind of brought this process out?
I've got it's on my website. I've got some rubber stamps that I made because I got tired of writing the same thing on student homework. And it's sort of changed over time which ones are the ones that get used the most, but less detail is one. They've all been writing short stories since the 5th grade. And so they describe the room and describe it and describe it and describe it and describe it. And nobody has time to read that in a screenplay. I think this is in the book. It's my all-time favorite. I wish I'd written it. Description of a room. It's like interior Bob's apartment, a shitty room. Okay. You made a picture. I have a picture in my mind. It's not exactly the same, but it's plenty. And now you move on. And so less detail was one.
You know what? I would warrant that it's even more powerful, because I think when you can have a description and have it mean something different to as many different people that read it, you're actually engaging them, a lot like a novel, in a much more personal way.
They're creating it in their head. Now, if you need to tell them about the monster hiding behind the sofa, do.
Right.
But nobody cares about the wallpaper or the color of the paint or the fact that there are pizza boxes all over the floor, unless they're going to trip on them later.
Right.
Then it matters. But that was one. The spell check drives me nuts. There's so many things that drive me nuts, but the character names that rhyme, for instance.
Oh yeah.
That one, people that are not in the business laugh at you when you say that. So what do you mean character names that rhyme? Why is that a problem? What about character names that start with the same letter? What about character names that are all the same length?
Right.
I literally had one student write a screenplay that had 3 characters in it named Jake. And I said, why did you do this? She said, well, I in high school had 3 boyfriends named Jake. I said, that doesn't have anything to do with this screenplay, and I can't tell them apart. It wasn't like Heather's,
right,
where they all were named Heather, but it mattered.
Yeah.
Anyway, the character names, that never is going to go away. And I've got a handout that I made for myself. I mean, a lot of this stuff is problems I had or still have. And the character names that rhyme or start with the same letter is a thing that it's very difficult to get away from. So I have a piece of paper that has the alphabet down the side, A, B, C, D. And so there'll be A for Albert, L for Lavender, and you can't use L anymore.
Right.
And you wouldn't believe how many times I think up a new character that I got to have. I'll go back to that sheet for that particular script and look, that letter will have already been taken. It's really silly, but it really makes a difference because you cannot confuse the reader.
Now, even in the writing process, like I use Final Draft, and if you start in Word with L and 3 different ones come up, it slows me down because I got to scroll. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Never. Yeah. Pow, L, bang, and off you go.
Right. And so it messes with your flow to some extent.
Yes, I like Final Draft a lot because it speeds up some of it. But then every now and then I'll still write with a pencil and I'll still write with a typewriter. We've got at the school where I used to teach, we have a typewriter. I saw a movie called California Typewriters, a documentary about typewriters. And in it, John Mayer says he only writes his songs on a typewriter. And he said, because if you write on a computer and you misspell a word, it puts a blue line under it. And that throws him out of who he needs to be. And I thought, oh my heavens, this is the cure for writer's block, a typewriter. And so the university bought a typewriter and gave me an empty office, and I put it in there and I took the correcting ribbon out. And it doesn't help everybody, but I would give tours to high school students and their parents, and I'd say, well, there's the writing room. And the letter that John Mayer wrote me was taped to the door. And I said, do you ever write a sentence in your computer and erase it and hate yourself? And when they sag and kind of go, oh, I go, okay, you might think about a typewriter. Right. And again, as I said, it doesn't help everybody, but the ones that it helps, it's mind-blowing how much it helps, because I've had people who were so tied up inside themselves. It's all about a fear of failing to be perfect. That's where it comes from. And the typewriter, what you're going to type is going to be misspelled and horrible, and you cannot fix it, and you cannot erase it. And so finally, you're going to get to the bottom of the page. You're going to take the page out and it'll be terrible, but you can't erase it, or you didn't, and there it exists, and now you can fix it. And so, I mean, I had extremely gifted students who said, I've never been able to get this much written ever in my life until I got on the typewriter. And she could write, this one woman, she could write 6 pages in an hour, and she wasn't able to do that in a week when she's in my class before she got on the typewriter. So I don't know how I got on that, spell check and typewriter and how I write.
Oh, no, that it goes to one of the points that you make in your book, and I actually also make in my book, is don't rewrite while you're writing. And this,
oh God, no.
Yeah.
Just keep going forward. You got to think, I'm the greatest writer since William Shakespeare.
Right.
And then you just keep going forward. And when you get it done and the pile of pages is there and it exists, then you can start trashing what you did, but not while you're doing it. Heavens no.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer of 2 things. One, I think a first draft is just basically generating a lump of clay. And the second draft is molding it.
Okay? Right.
You take pieces away and you can reshape it. And you can do whatever you want to, but you can't do that until you have the lump of clay.
Correct.
So the writing process for me doesn't actually start until after the first draft is written.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's very hard to get. I mean, they always hear, oh, this person wrote it and it was perfect and that's what they shot. Preston Sturges apparently did that. And a guy whose name escapes me did a movie that the name will escape me too. Not Playing by Heart. Oh, the title just kills me. Anyway, he did the TV show, The Proud Family was his TV show. And he wrote a script with Angelina Jolie and Sean Connery, and I'll come up with the name. And that stuff was first draft, and that's what he made. But that never happens to normal people. And so, but people think it does, and it just absolutely doesn't.
Yeah, there's this need for perfection. And it's, there's that quote, perfection is the enemy of completion. And it couldn't be more accurate than screenwriting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned this one section where I have a student who'll write 10 pages and they'll get notes and they'll go back and rewrite the 10 pages, even though I tell them not to. I'm like, make the notes on the side, keep a separate file. And then they'll write the next 10 pages and realize they have to go back and set up things in the first 10 pages. And they'll go back and rewrite the first 10 pages and the second 10 pages based on the notes. And then that pattern repeats itself every 10 pages. So by the time they get to like 30 pages, they've actually written 100 pages. They could be done with the first draft.
Right.
And then moving on to the actual writing process, but they're not, because they just keep tweaking and keep tweaking and keep tweaking. And Yeah, it's very frustrating for me too.
It's frustrating when it's lovely when they do what you tell them to and it works. It's frustrating when they don't listen and then it doesn't work.
Well, I think one of the reasons they're supposed to be in school is to listen to someone who's kind of gone through this, and can give them a little bit of advice sometimes.
Every now and then you'll get somebody that goes, "What does this guy know?" Well, more than you.
All right. So I want to just kind of point out, I'm going to go randomly throughout your book.
Okay.
The viewers at home, the listeners at home can't see the notes that I have sticking out of your book, but I'd warrant there's at least 50 or 60 in here, and there's only 100 points. So I probably, tagged almost every one of them. But number 71, you haven't ripped out the first 20 pages. And you use a quote from Walter Hill: "There is no backstory." And this is the sentence that caught my eye. "Putting backstory in the first act is a mistake nearly everyone makes." Can you expand on that, please?
No, I'm kidding. I asked an agent at CAA one time, and I said, what's the mistake that most writers make? She said, they put the backstory in the first act. It's just like, you have a tendency, everybody wants to explain what's going on and how we got here. And so they put that in, which is fine because it's a first draft, but you don't want to leave it there. I mean, this happened to me on a screenplay I wrote relatively recently. I decided, oh my God, I don't need the first 17 pages of this script. The story starts here. And you can read a script when you didn't write it. It's much, much easier to critique someone else's work than your own.
Absolutely.
And you can go, oh, this is where fade in goes. This is where it feels right. Start now. And then all that can go away. And you then get a highlighter because you've printed the stuff and mark the 4 things in the first 20 pages that we really got to know. And then you figure out how to work that in your now new 20 pages. And it works great. It's just too much time setting up, and the story doesn't start. And the reader in the real world, they're going to stop reading it.
Right. I often find that a lot of the stuff that I write in my first act is backstory for me, not for them.
Right.
And so I usually tell my students, you need to write a first act to get to a second act, to get to the third act.
Right.
And then the first act, probably 90% of it's going to change.
But you have to be open to change.
Right.
You have to be open to the idea that this is not ever going to be perfect, right, but this isn't perfect and I'm going to change it because I need to make it better, as opposed to I'm done. That's going to get you in trouble. You need to be, because man, when you've got a job and they want you to rewrite it, you're going to say, yes, 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 can't wait. What do you want me to do? What would you want me to change? We're going to cut out half of it. Fine. Which half?
Right. No, that's absolutely true. One of the things, I finally came up with a reasonable argument that overcomes the statement the students always make when I tell them, you don't need this particular scene. But that's why I wrote the screenplay, is what they say. Have you heard that before?
Oh, sure. I've had it happen to me in a script I wrote that got made. They took out my favorite thing. I said, well, the check cleared.
Right. And so I took out my favorite thing in a few movies that I've directed over the years. But the argument that I came up with basically is, they say again, but that's why I wrote the script. And I'm like, well, then it worked. You wrote the script. Now you don't need it anymore.
Right. That's really good. That's excellent.
Took me a long time to get to that point. And I want to talk about something that is a pet peeve of mine, that seems to be a pet peeve of yours, that I actually get a lot of grief from my colleagues when I teach from. And that is hammering my kids on passive writing and on grammar and on things of that nature. Tell me your thoughts on that, because so the argument I hear is you're not teaching them screenwriting, and I'm like, I'm absolutely teaching them screenwriting, but they don't have this fundamental stuff down.
Okay, here's my argument.
Okay,
for exactly why you're right is when you finish a screenplay and you want to get an agent, then they're going to pick your script up and they're going to flip to the back to see how many pages it is, and they're going to flip to the front and start reading page 1. They'll read page 1, but they cannot tell reading page 1 whether you understand what character arc is, or if you know what an act break is, or if you know where a midpoint goes, blah. They don't know if you know any of that stuff, but they can tell if you can write a good, clear, clean, concise sentence. And if you can't, they're going to put it down. And so grammar matters. Spelling obviously matters. all that kind of stuff. Way too many words in a sentence matters. And it needs to move like a rocket sled on rails. And that they can tell by reading page one. If you're not pounding your students about that, they're wasting their time. You have to get them to understand that it's got to be tight.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be so tight that it squeaks, but it's got to be pretty tight, way tighter than most beginning writers ever imagine. I mean, I'm critiquing a script for a client now, and I rewrote one of his pages. And it's just like I slashed my throat on the page. It's red ink all over it. And I'm going to type it up for him clean and say, this is the one you had. This is what it looks like now. I didn't add any words. I just took stuff out and maybe moved some things around.
How much of that page did you?
It's all there, but you've got to change it to make it smooth, because the grammar, all that stuff absolutely matters. Yeah, you're 100% correct on that one.
Yay, I appreciate that. I will use that argument. I'll record this and have it on my phone so I can play it for other faculty member who give me too much grief. One of the things that I really love about this book is you have tons of pages where you show, how you've basically taken the red ink 2 pages and hacked them and tightened them, and you cut out 50% of a page and you don't lose a thing.
No, and it really makes a huge difference. And the person reads it, and now all of a sudden, as you say, if a page goes to half a page, that gives you something at the back end. You now have a half a page of blank space that you can use for something. I had a student who's turned out to be a good friend, sent me a script. They were entering a contest, and the script was 65 pages long, and it had to get to 60 or they couldn't enter the contest. It was a TV pilot. And they were worn out, and they sent it to me, and I said, okay, I'll go over it. I'll look at it. It took me a day. I went over it for a day, and I marked it all up, and I sent it. And I didn't know how much I'd taken out, but it turned out it was 4 pages out of the 65. I got it down, I think 4.5 pages. And she was able to get it down, like inspired to get it down a little bit more tight. But it makes all the difference in the world. It's got to be a good read.
Yeah, no doubt about that. You talk about that about your first 10 pages. You blow the first 10 pages as one of the mistakes you say. Tell me about that.
You again, well, the backstory problem.
Right.
I mean, it's got to move. I mean, they moved the movie script for Crazy Stupid Love. Have you seen that movie?
Yeah, I love that movie.
It's so good. Well, the end of page 1 of the script is when they're in the restaurant, and they pan down. You see he's in grubby tennis shoes and she's in high heels. That teaches you something. And he says, let's talk about dessert. What do you want? Tell me what you want. We'll both say it at the same time. And he says, I want creme brulee. And she says, I want a divorce.
Bam.
That was on page 2.
Right.
Of the first draft of the script. And the producer said to the writer, that's got to be at the bottom of page 1. Tighten that up. It's got to move fast. My son's a writer, and he showed me a scene from like an ocean liner movie from the 1930s. So this we're in a hurry stuff is not new. The opening shot is the big ocean liner going through the dark and heavy seas. It's in black and white. The second shot in the film is the captain up there giving orders with his hat and everything in the rain. Someone walks up to him with a note, and he reads it. It says, the engine room is on fire. That's in the first 30 seconds. And Box Trolls, which I think is mentioned in my book, is a great beginning. 10 minutes into that movie, you know everything you need to know about who the good guy is, who the bad guy is, why the bad guy wants what he wants, which is appalling. And you know everything you need to know, and you're in it.
Right.
And so that's a big problem with, like, I want to just, let me tell you about this, and let me tell you about that. Let me tell you about these 2 things. They're going to matter later. No, just get us going.
No, the description I use when I'm talking to my students is it's the difference between someone dipping their toe in some water and someone diving in. And that's how you want to start a screenplay, is by diving into the water. You want to
absolutely. And then it turns out to be boiling hot, and boy, that was a mistake, but we're in it now.
All right. There's a couple things in your book that I had never heard the phrases or the terms that you used, and I would like for you to expand on that. Number 35. Okay. You talk about you have not used the incredible power of rhyming scenes to your advantage. What does that mean, rhyming scenes? It's
a scene that you have a scene at the beginning of the or somewhere towards the beginning of the movie, and then later on in the movie you have something else that rhymes with that scene later. I think the example I use in the book that I adore is how do you show us in Kramer versus Kramer that the hero is a bad father at the beginning, but he improves. And so the beginning, he tries to make French toast, and he literally takes the piece of bread, folds it up and sticks it in a coffee cup with the egg in the coffee cup and breaks the piece of bread and messes it up. Later in the movie, when he's been away from his wife who left him and he's raising the child by himself, he breaks those eggs, I think one-handed into the thing, beats it with a fork like a professional, and does it perfectly. And you look at it and you go, oh my God, he's changed. He's better now. And they just showed you that he's different by the same scene repeated, which is a rhyming scene, but with massive new knowledge the second time. That's what that means.
And it's visual.
Yeah, you see, and so you don't have to, he doesn't say, look, I'm a better father now. And
Right.
little Timmy says, yes, Daddy, you sure are.
All right. So one more thing that I had never heard of before, number 43, is you didn't A-B the dialogue. I never heard the term before of A-being dialogue. What does that mean?
My teacher in film school at USC, Jim Boyle, who was great, what a great teacher. This was his idea. And what you do is one of the key things you have to do with dialogue is the characters need to not sound like the other character, and which is hard if you've like got identical twins that grew up in the same house. But one likes manga and one likes, soccer.
Right.
They're going to start being different people. So the characters cannot sound the same. And so what happens is when you're writing, the way that Jim taught us how to do it, you got character A from Savannah, Georgia. And in the scene, you kind of know what's going to happen. The character B is from Moscow, Russia, and Savannah, Georgia guy wants to steal the guy's hat. And so that's kind of what's going to happen. So you just write in column A all the character A's dialogue in the entire scene without B thinking about character B at all. Well, at first it's going to sound like you, but you got to make it sound like they're from Savannah, Georgia. And so then you write that person's dialogue, and pretty soon you're kind of getting into how they talk, and you write the whole scene from their point of view and more lines and odd lines and throw things in, and then you stop, and now you go to character B, the person from Russia, and you write character B. Well, they're going to sound at the beginning just like they're from Savannah, Georgia.
Yeah.
But slowly but surely you're going to remember what you learned about Russian, and you're going to get it right, and you're going to write what they say in the scene, bouncing off of what the other person's already said, and you just stick with their dialogue. Then when you're done, you just pick the good lines here and there and just ping pong back and forth, and that's your dialogue. But now they sound, A sounds like A, B sounds like B, A sounds like A, and not like B at all. And that's a simple way to separate out characters' dialogue, which is one of the most important things in all of writing.
No, that is fantastic, because I know if I was writing the scene, I would be bouncing back and forth between the two character voices. And, how hard is it to be able to do that simultaneously?
Oh, it's really hard on my tiny, tired pea brain, that's for sure. This is a little bit easier. But we were talking about earlier about Final Draft. One of the great things about Final Draft or any screenwriting software really is you can say, I'm going to search for Lavender's dialogue, and you put his name all in caps and search just for caps Lavender, and pow, 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 all the way through the entire script. I'm just reading your dialogue. And I quickly go, oh, that doesn't sound like him.
Right.
Because you're only looking at his all the way through. That's a great tool that the computer gives you that's really, really nice.
Well, I just learned something. I didn't realize Final Draft did that. That will
Yes,
make
it
my life
does.
infinitely easier. When I talk about rewriting to my students, I talk about my process is called layered rewriting, where I will do exactly that. I will just go through the first draft and read one person's dialogue and work on it. And then I will go through the next person's dialogue.
Right.
And I will do also, on a scene by scene basis. This time I'm looking for the polarity of the scene, or this time I'm looking for, is there enough tension or conflict in the scene? And this time I'm going to kind of have a long list of, all these different things that I do. And it's, it's an arduous process, but
yes, it takes forever.
Yeah. My brain also I can't juggle 5 things in a screenplay at the same time. And that goes back.
Every now and then you can read the whole script. I'm just going to sit down and read my script.
Right.
And I'm going to see what I learn. But like if you're depressed because it's terrible, there are things you can do to move you forward. Like I'm just going to check my slug lines.
Right.
I'm going to make sure every time we're in Will's office, it says Will's office. every single time. Well, that's moving forward, and it's not taxing your brain or making you feel bad, like the fact that you can't write this woman's dialogue exactly right, but you're still moving forward. And then after you've had a victory there, then you can go do something else.
Right.
And but looking at what I call in my book the laser beam read, pick this and go through the entire script and do that. I'm going to make sure every single sentence ends with some punctuation.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't believe how many times people don't do that. So that's one thing to check, and that's not requiring any angst to check, but it moves you forward.
Yeah. No, it goes back to that issue that I think both of us agree on, that a lot of students have, where they're perfectionists and they keep rewriting the first 10 pages or the next 10 pages. You can't balance the 1,000 things that your screenplay has to have and get it all right at once.
No.
Yeah, you got to just get to the end and then start working on it piece by piece. And
step one is get to the end. If you don't get to the end, you never even finish step one. There are like 29,000 more steps, but you got to do that one. And so, yeah, rewriting while you write. Why would you? Although I love, as you can tell from looking at my book, I love massaging the prose. Yeah. I like making those sentences perfect. Well, why take the time to do that in a scene you might cut?
Right.
Don't do that stuff until the very, very end, because if you like cut 10 scenes out of the middle of your movie and you fixed every single one of those sentences, what a waste of time.
Right. Speaking of those massaging the sentences, you talk about ending your sentences with the most important word in the sentence.
Yes.
I had not heard that before. And I was like, and the example you used was with an accent. I was like, oh, wow, that is so much better.
Well, the opening sentence of, I don't have it handy, of Charlotte's Web, which is one of the great books of all time. And I highly recommend anyone who's read it as a child read it again now. But it opens, says, well, I can't remember her name, Faith maybe. Faith asks her father, Dad, where are you going with that axe? That's the most important word in that sentence. And you know the most important word comes in a joke. When someone tells a joke that can't tell a joke well, it's because they can't remember the order of the words in the punchline. Mm-hmm. And so they rearrange it, and it's out of order and wrong. If you can tell a joke correctly, the power is going to come in that last word in that joke. And literally everyone is leaning forward with anticipation, wanting to get to the end of the joke. And it's not funny until you say that last word, and then they laugh. And so, yeah, and rearranging sentence order, I do it all the time. I'm working out on a client script this morning, and I was taking his sentences and moving the beginning of the sentence to the end of the sentence and the end of the sentence, and because that's where the power is at the end. The other thing people do in sentences that drive me crazy is they don't put them in time order, which is you don't have to do all the time, but you want it to be in the order in which the events happened. Is like, you know, he smiled as he went out the door. That's good. But you might want to say he went out the door and smiled, and that's the last thing you read. That was a bad example. I'm sure I could come up with a better one.
The example that you have in the book is the two girls raced monster trucks in a video game. Do you remember that?
Yes. Yeah. It says so-and-so are racing monster trucks. And you go, oh my God, she's only 16 years old. How did this work? And then you get to the end of the sentence, it's in a video game. You go, oh, I see. Okay, great. Thanks for messing with me.
So, yeah. So if you flip that around, it makes a little more sense.
And the best word last and image order are two things that I harp on. Is you almost always the best word is at the end, the most powerful words at the end of the sentence. And then the image order needs to be this happens, and then this happens, and this happens, or you're going to confuse them.
Okay. So image order for context.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just so the sentence makes sense.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Because I think a lot of times when we're writing, we're in our own little worlds and we know everything. And so we write. And then when somebody reads it, they don't necessarily see or think what we do. And these are two wonderful, wonderful tools to help that clarification.
Yeah, you understand everything, and then you've got to give it to somebody else to read, and don't tell them anything, and they're going to find out that you're going to find out they didn't understand it. One of Jim Boyle, my teacher, he said, watch someone read your script. If they turn the page back, that means you've lost them. Oh, that was great. I've never had a friend that good, but if you do, then get them to do that.
I might try that, but I think it puts a lot of pressure on the
Well,
person.
Final Draft, I don't know if you know this, Final Draft, who has not paid me to make this announcement, Final Draft will read your script out loud to you. And you can name the characters and they'll read it out loud. And it's not the greatest thing in the world, but it does absolutely help because you hear it out loud. Because when you read it in your head, it sounds good to you because, hey, you wrote it. And so you know what it's supposed to be like. And isn't that wonderful? But if you have someone else read it out loud to you, another friend or Final Draft, it really helps. And it's like listening to books on tape or now books on Audible in the car, whatever. When I'm listening to someone read a book, my level of irritation at the quality of bad writing just goes through the ceiling. When I hear bad writing read out loud, it kills me. And so I have a much lower threshold. I just throw it out. I take the tape, throw it out in the back seat, pick another one up, stick another one in.
Right.
But hearing it read out loud is a really good way to hear your work.
Yeah, I'm on the final stages of the polish for my book.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing the editor said to me is, you need to read it out loud to yourself. And I can't tell you how many changes I've made just on how clunky something sounds.
Get somebody else to read it out loud to you and see how that goes. I mean, it really is different because when you read it out loud, even out loud, where you hear it, you still are going to smooth things over. But if they stumble on a sentence, it really helps. So you're reading it out loud. There's nothing that I write that I don't read out loud. Always. There's nothing that I write, and this makes me very popular with Hewlett-Packard, the people that sell ink and toner, is you have to print your work.
Right.
And when I was teaching, I would print my students' homework because they couldn't afford to do it. And I printed it and I left it outside my office, and they'd pick it up at night or whenever. And then because you have to have a hard copy. You have to have a pencil in your hand or a pen in your hand. Reading it in the computer is not the same as looking at it. I started on a typewriter, so I automatically had a hard copy. People that start with a computer and a printer, they'll leave it in the printer until they print it for their teacher, and that's a big mistake. Right. Or they'll print it finally at the end, but you have to print it. I print it over and over and over again. And years into doing this, I still think, oh, Will, you're a professional writer. You know how to do this. You can just send this in. I go, well, that's not the advice you give, Will. You better print it.
Yeah. And
your brain connects to the page in a different way.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. In the book, you mentioned having a reading of your script where you actually cast the parts and you do all that. I know that here in Philadelphia, we have a wonderful screenwriting group that reads everyone's scripts and everyone reads part of it and it lets you hear it out loud. That even takes it to a whole different level when you have it read that way. That's okay.
What you want to do when you're having a table read of your script is you want to either pay the actors or feed them really well. Because if they know they're going to get something from it other than just thank you, they're going to prepare more. And the better prepped they are for the event, the more you're going to learn. So it's worth it for you to give them some money or a good meal. It really helps. But yeah, a table read is a great idea because they're going to read that dialogue differently than you thought they were going to.
Yeah, they're going to create a backstory beyond, what you've created.
And then you can ask them questions because they're actors and they're going to connect to the characters in a different way than you do because you're a writer. And so they're going to give you great advice about their character.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, I want to move on to number 19, which is the chapter you start on structure. And I just really love the way that you phrased this. Number 19 is you worried about structure when you came up with your story. If you did, I'm sorry. You missed some of the most joyous moments of writing. Character and story come first. Love, love, love this. Please expand for all those novice writers out there.
You need to start thinking about this person. Who is this person? What's their problem? When we meet them, what do they want? Everybody always says, what do they want? And I've learned a couple of new ways to put that. What do they want desperately? What do they want more than anything in the world? That helped me a lot. I learned that at a children's book conference. What do they want more than anything in the world? And that's going to and then who is it that's trying to stop them from getting it? Then you have an opponent, and you have to have somebody to bang into. the girl's got to be angry at her mother. The boy's got to be angry at his cousin. I mean, you've got to have somebody that wants to stop you from getting what you want. And so all that character stuff, the more you play with it, the longer you mess with the characters and think about who they are and think about who they are and think about who they are, the better your story is going to be, because the more you talk about the characters to yourself, the more things you're going to come up with that matter to the story. So character first, absolutely. And then what might happen, make stuff up. And then you're going to begin, it's going to become into focus. And now you're going to begin to think about end of act one, what's the midpoint, that kind of stuff. And you can think all this stuff can happen at the same time, but I think you need to start with the people, because that's who the actors are going to latch onto. That's who the audience is going to latch onto, is who are these people and what's going on with them. And you need to spend a ton of time with them. There's a woman, I mean, you can do it all kinds of ways, and any way you want to do it is fine. You don't have to do it the way I do it. You can do it the way you do it. There's a woman who's a YA novelist, and Ellen Hopkins, and she spends months asking questions about her characters. She said, just what's this thing to them? What's their favorite color? Yellow. Why is it their favorite color? Well, because it's their favorite, their sister, his little sister wore it on the day she died. And so he always thinks about yellow. Why is that a problem for him in the story? Well, because the girl in band, the band uniforms are yellow, but he's got a crush on the girl in band, but he can't be in band because they got yellow uniforms, because it reminds me of his sister. That's really interesting. There's a book that I've landed on lately called, Recording Your Family's History, which you can buy for $5 online. It's a zillion questions to ask your grandparents, but it's a zillion questions to ask your parents and to ask your characters in a story. It really is a great book. And you can, the more time you will not waste time on characters. You will not waste time on outlining. I'm a big fan of outlining. I mean, you can do it again any way you want to, but if you pound the outline harder, you're going to spend less time overall writing the whole thing.
The beauty of an outline is you can work on one thing at a time in an outline. You know,
absolutely.
As opposed to having to work on 50 different things. When I write, I think of my first act as an emotional draft, and then I think of my second, not the first act, the first draft, and then I think of the second draft as a technical draft, where I'm like, okay, let me find my structural points and make sure they fit where they're supposed to be, and let me get rid of this extra stuff that I don't need, and let me, so I feel the same way that you do about that.
It's a process.
I want to talk about the antagonist here.
Please.
There's a couple things that I love about the antagonist that you wrote. I'm gonna give you my take on it. One is, everyone knows that the bad guy's the bad guy, but that's not enough. I love the fact, number 14, the opponent is not the hero's agent of change. Can you expand upon that? Because I think
if the opponent is not your hero's agent of change, you got a problem. Because the hero's got a problem at the beginning of the movie, and they don't want to change, and the only way they're going to change if they have this explosion in their life and they're going to change. Well, that comes from their relationship to the opponent. So the opponent, through the trouble that the opponent causes them, in order to beat the opponent, the hero's going to have to change. If the opponent never comes along, they're never going to be a better person. They're never going to solve their problem without this person that's fighting them. And there's the simple example of that is Casablanca. Rick is a selfish jerk at the beginning, and then he bumps into Ilsa, who's the number one opponent in the story, his ex-girlfriend, who's now his new girlfriend. And she, because he's in conflict with her, he learns to be a better person. And he ends up dumping her at the end of the movie, the one thing he wanted at the beginning, when he's selfish, but he gets rid of her because she's necessary to win the war. And so he goes from selfish to very, very giving and looking after his fellow man. And he would have never made that change had he not bumped into her partway through the movie. On page, minute 25, end of act one, she walks into his life. I think it's minute 25. So yeah, that's the opponent's everything, or the antagonist. People have different, whatever they call them is fine.
Right. The way that I design my antagonist is, I will have my protagonists and they have an emotional wound. And then what I do is I plant that emotional wound in the ground and I water and nurture it. and I grow my antagonist out of it. I want them
Yep.
to be the epitome of
Exactly.
protagonist's emotional wound. Therefore, when they defeat the antagonist, they also defeat their own emotional wound.
I feel like it's a big red button on the hero's chest, and the opponent is the perfect person. Just poke that button.
Right.
You create them to be the one that does that. And it's when you see it in real life, it's horrifying to see like someone like a parent who's doing that to their child.
Right.
And you go, my son, who's now a novelist, when he was like 6, we were at a restaurant and we were face to face in a little booth, like a 1-person booth. And there was a wall of bushes between us and the other people at the next table. And this father was just berating his child about something really over the top. And my son stood up on his chair and looked over at that guy and said, how would you like it if someone talked to you that way?
Wow.
So my son was the opponent in that story. And then maybe that guy's going to not do that anymore.
Well, let's hope. Yeah.
And the good news is the guy didn't clock him.
Well, I would hope not.
Yeah.
There's something else you mentioned about the antagonist, which I think in my mind kind of went unsaid, but it's so nice to have it said and go, oh yeah, I need to make sure I do that. And that is, you don't give the bad guy a big speech.
The bad guy speech.
Yeah, the bad guy speech. Tell me about the bad guy speech.
So it's, you got to hear why they're doing this, because they're doing it generally. They're doing very bad things, but they have a really good reason to be doing it. And it's really, the one that I put in the book is Magua in The Last of the Mohicans. I mean, he is so awful. He's trying to kill these young girls, and he's trying to kill their dad, and he's trying to kill our hero and all this stuff. But there's one point where he's talking to his friend, and he said the dad, who he called the gray-haired, he said he kidnapped me and he kidnapped my wife, and my wife thought I was dead. And he kidnapped him and took him away, and the wife thought he was dead and married somebody else. He killed. So he says, I'm going to get that guy. And you totally understand why he's doing it. It makes him not sympathetic because he's really, really mean to our friends, but you certainly understand why he did it. And I mean, it's a 2-part speech. First, he says, this is what I'm going to do to that guy. And you go, whoa. And then later, then you find out why he's so mad.
He said, I'm going to wipe his seed from the earth or something like that.
He's going to kill his children in front of him so that he will know that his seed has been wiped away from the earth. Yeah.
Wow. Brutal.
That's an angry guy. But then later on, he tells his story about my wife married somebody else.
Yeah.
Because he kidnapped me.
There's another example I think that you use with the Danny DeVito character in Throw Mama from the Train with the coin collection.
Oh my God. I'll never write anything that good as that scene in my entire life. I've shown it in class now for years and years and years, and I don't cry anymore, but I used to cry every single time I showed that scene. It's one of the finest pieces of writing I've ever seen. Is the hero is Billy Crystal, and he's a writing teacher, and Danny DeVito is this absolutely horribly annoying adult ed student in his class. And so Billy Crystal has a horrible wife, and Danny DeVito has a horrible mother. And so they come up with this plan of, we're going to kill each other's, the people we don't like. And so we meet, and Danny DeVito is just the most annoying person on the planet, and you cannot stand him. And so then you go over to his house, and you meet his mother, and she's really, really horrible. And Danny DeVito says, do you want to kill my mom? And he says, no, I don't want to kill your mom. And so you just can't stand Danny DeVito. And then he says, do you want to see my coin collection? And Billy Crystal says, because it's a good scene and there's conflict, he says, no, I don't want to see your coin collection. I don't want to see it. He said, oh, come on, please, let me show it to you. No, I don't want to see it. And he throws himself down on the floor, and he peels back the carpet. He lifts up the hiding piece of wood and pulls out this little box and dumps these 5 coins on the floor. And Billy Crystal says, okay, I'll come look at your coin collection. Okay, I'm choking up. I'm never going to get through this. So Billy Crystal lies down, and he picks up the coin, and it's a quarter. And you see this quarter, look how shiny it is. And he says, what's it worth? He said, well, it's a quarter. So it's a quarter, a nickel, a dime, and 2 nickels. Because this is it. These coins in a coin collection, they're supposed to be worth something. And Billy Crystal and Danny DeVito says, man, he says, this is change from a hot dog my daddy bought me at Coney Island.
Hmm.
And this is something else, and this is something else from the same thing. And so Billy Crystal is just totally a different person now. He says, so this has changed that your daddy gave you. And he said, yeah. And so because his father's dead, he's married to the worst mother in the entire, his mother's the worst woman in the whole world. All of a sudden, A, Billy Crystal likes him, and then B, you like him. Mm-hmm. And for the rest of the movie, he can do no wrong because he makes this one fantastic speech. It's just obviously effective. No, works on me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, that's just hearing you get choked up about it got me all emotional, but even thinking about it, I would love to know how that writer came up with that moment, because, you know, giving these inanimate objects emotional power.
Oh, and you just understand Danny DeVito's problem so well because of that.
Right, at the core. So I'm going to talk about one more thing with you, because I think we've given away 98 of your 100 secrets. So I don't want to give them all away. But one of the ones that really spoke to me is not using location as a character. That's something I harp on all the time with my students. Can you expand on the importance of that?
Sure. If you can move your story to a different city than where it's taking place and have the story work, it's not a very good story. It needs to be site specific. So if it takes place in Key West, Florida, and you can move it to Nome, Alaska and have it still work, then Key West was not a part of that story, and it could be. Right. There's so much you can get from where you are. And people say, oh, a nondescript town. I said, descript it.
Right.
Tell us what this place is. What's it like? What's its personality like? It is a character in there helping you to do the things that you need to do in your story. Use it. Absolutely use it. You think about where Dr. Zhivago ends up in that windswept house with Laura, all covered with ice. Mm-hmm. That was a big part of that story. That location really mattered to how you feel about him and her and how they feel about each other. Made a huge difference.
Yeah. One of the terms that I often dislike, much like in the script, he's an average guy. And I'm like, and I look at him, I'm like, well, average guy to me is a 6'2" Indian dude. Is that who the guy is? They're like, no. I'm like, then how about you describe who this person is so we know exactly?
Well, the other thing is first of all, unless 6'2" matters in the story, because he's like got to be tall. Right. Don't tell us that. Right. Don't tell us what he looks like unless looking that, he has a big scar down the side of his face. Tell us that. Tell us what they're like. Tell us who they are as a person. Describe that. Don't tell us about their hair color and their clothes and their makeup and stuff. Say, who are they as a person? And there's a thing in my book where they describe, like 6 character descriptions. My all-time favorite is the dude from whatever that movie is, the bowling movie, Big Lebowski.
Yeah.
They describe the dude as a man in whom casualness runs deep.
Love it.
That is that guy.
Yep.
They talk about his wardrobe because it matters. He's wearing Bermuda shorts and a bathrobe in the grocery store when we meet him. Right. But the man in whom casualness runs deep, that they worked on that, I'm assuming. They took a long time to get that description, but that is that person. And so he is unlike anybody at all. He's great. I was speaking about the dude, something else that's not in the book. It's in the sequel. And you talked about if we've given all the secrets in the book, the website is yourscreenplaysucks.com. And there's like 10 years of blogging in there with more stuff that you can go get for free that eventually will be a sequel to the book. But I got a phone call from Jeff Dowd one day. He found my phone number. He is the guy who was the dude. Mm-hmm. And so he called me up and said, hey, Will, I'm going to be in Nashville. I want to come to your class and talk to your screenwriting class. I go, you want to come and talk to my class? That means I'm not going to have to work for a solid hour. Fantastic. Come on. And so but he wanted to tell, he had something he wanted to say. He answered questions about the Big Lebowski, but he had something he wanted to teach my students. He said, and this is what he wanted to teach, which is not in the book. He said, how does your character enter the stage? He said, you need to spend a lot of time thinking about how your character takes the stage, which I had not ever thought about it in that way. He said, and I don't know if this is true, but it sounded true, certainly. He said, the opening scene of The Godfather was the wedding. And Robert Towne said to Francis Coppola, we're not learning anything about your hero. And so Robert Towne wrote the opening scene in the movie, which is now the scene that we remember, where that Italian guy opens it up and says, I believe in America. And you learn like about 11 things about the Godfather in that scene. He's tough. He's respected. He's fair. He's very good with cats. That's in there. And you learn all this stuff. And that's how that guy takes the stage. And that came to me from Jeff Dowd. I've never, ever seen that before. I've never seen anybody mention it before. And I thought it was a great lesson. But I mentioned The Big Lebowski, and that triggered that thought.
Right. No. Fantastic, fantastic, fantastic. I love it when I learn. And thank you. Thank you so much, because like I said, I've been doing this a long time, and it's so refreshing to hear your take. And it was so nice to revisit your book. I think it's
Thank you so much.
No, I think it's going to become something that's going to happen more often now for me. It's like I need to go back and kind of, refill. And you did mention the second book. When are your plans for the next book to come out?
I've got it. It's in a 3-ring binder,
Right.
so it exists. And I've retired from university level teaching. And so now one of my goals is to finish that book, Your Screenplay Still Sucks. And then the hope is I'll have enough material for another book, which I think I will. And that would be Your Screenplay Doesn't Suck, finally.
Nice. Well, I hope to one day reach the level of your third book so that one of my screenplays doesn't suck. And I believe you're also starting a new consulting company. Can you tell me about that?
Yes, a good friend of mine and I are working on starting a business. We don't have a name for it yet, so we don't have a website, but it's a script consulting business. I've been doing this for years. She's really good. She's very businesslike, and I'm very excited to be starting a new business. I'm looking forward to it.
She's a good friend of mine too, by pure coincidence, which is always nice. Yeah, small world.
It is a small world, which is fun every now and then.
Well, once again, the website is yourscreenplaysucks.com. Tons of free information on there. Will, I'm enlightened. I've enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on this podcast.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
All righty. Until next time.